Happy Memorial Day, everybody. I hope everybody had a fantastic long weekend, had a Monday off, and use it to your advantage to relax a little bit and get prepared for the week ahead. We've had quite a bit of opportunity lately. There's been a lot of great trades, and the range continues. It just depends on what type of trader you are, and if you are able to kind of switch to whatever is sort of moving. We had big momentum BBTH style market for quite some time. Low flow movers were running, and now we've got some really big NASDAQ trades like FL and HIVB and a bunch of other stocks that have major range. Even Roku on this breakout is every single day some really nice big range, and each day that it goes higher, it's just setting up for a better and a better trade eventually. So not to mention, we've had a couple back-to-back momentum trades, stuff like OTLK and a few of those, even BIOC, which is a known runner. Yeah, they need to raise, but it seems like the more obvious the raise is lately, the more that they squeeze it out. But on that note, as I say a lot, know what you own. And there was quite a few trades. I think it was Kenneth CNF this week or last week, where they did a reverse split, and it was a pretty nice move, and then all of a sudden halted, and they raised a bunch of money. So they've been doing that on a few of these names lately. So I always suggest and remind folks to if you are trading these things, at least be aware of what you're trading, just because if they're in dire need of some cash, then you're up against the filings, and that's what they need to do. So even something like OBLN was a fantastic trade, and you should be treating it as just a trade, but you never know if that pre-market action is going to end up with some type of raise. So with that said, whenever you're trading these, you need to just make sure that you're trading within means. Anytime these things are going nuts, it doesn't mean that you can't trade them on the long side. There was huge opportunity, especially this late day squeeze. There was huge opportunity. However, you can't be super aggressive on the long side, thinking that none of the filings matter. If they need money, if they're junk, if it was just 30 cents and now it's $1.50 on millions and millions and millions and millions of volumes, you should assume that they will do something like that. However, doesn't mean that they're always going to, and that's why I always say just know what you own. But look, there's a lot of times that nothing happens, and there's a lot of great opportunities. But the times that it does, you're just going to be happy that you're trading within your means. That's really the main thing, is just never oversize on these things, because eventually they do catch up. That one that you're like, this is going to go to the moon, and you size up like crazy, that's the one that's either going to halt or do the intraday offering or just be a pain. And so just always remember that, and you should be all right. So OTLK, I would 100% suggest checking out this video here, and it'll be right on the scan page here. I put this out pre-market around 8:30 a.m. or so. You can see when I was talking and when it was moving and whatnot. But this OTLK, just based on the pre-market action, I kind of felt like it was trapping. It kind of skipped up on air. It had some pretty good volume. SSR was on. And based on what I saw happening on level 2 and how it was reacting pre-market, I felt like they were trying to trap a little bit of the shorts to then potentially squeeze it out later. But that's only an idea. It does not matter until they actually go out with it. And so the goal, as I had went over in the video, was that it was kind of stuck in between a 220 and a 245, 250 top. So my goal was for it to wash to 220 out of the open, trap, and then trigger the 245 level 250. Now, obviously, it took all day, and if you traded it, fantastic. It had a really nice breakout late day, nice VWAP type a retest, and then breakout ABCD type move. It checked all the boxes. It worked out perfectly. And we might actually have some type of follow-up this week. So I would highly encourage you guys to go back and just kind of review the whole thought process before that trade actually happened, as to what I want to see to confirm thesis, and what would cause me to avoid it. And it'll just keep you safe. It kind of hits upon the same topics that we were discussing on the last YouTube video, if you saw it, on the failed breakouts. And sometimes where I get ahead of myself looking for that big breakout, but when you actually put the numbers behind it, 80 to 90% of the time that breakout's going to fail. So if you're spending that much time on these breakouts, then you got to remember that these things don't do it 90% of the time. Most of the time it might end up being that top. So that was a really good mindset change for me, especially in this market post BPTH type stuff, because there was a lot of stuff that looked fantastic, but as it looked fantastic, that was their liquidity event. The better it looked, the more they were selling, and then they just walked. So anyway, OTLK, let's see what happens on Monday. I don't want to get too ahead of myself on what could potentially be a trade. I want to see how it opens in the morning. Week open, ideally 250, 260s, kind of consolidate, maybe trap again, and then they start to push towards 3. Otherwise, some type of big gap up over the Friday highs and breakout squeeze 320s, maybe a little bit higher, something like that. And then I'd look for a potential backside. Definitely shorts are in here. Definitely shorts are trapped. It's been an interesting last few weeks, especially with the volume and whatnot. They've got some 290 warrants and whatnot. So, look, they could raise money with that anytime. And, you just have to be aware of it. But for now, as long as there's some good liquidity, I will definitely be interested during the daytime. Probably not pre-market, and probably not for an overnight hold. It's not my style, given the risk and whatnot. AVH was a nice one on Friday. This one they basically had some type of comments with United Airlines that they might extend a $150 million loan. And it just kind of ripped, and it started to go, and so I started to kind of join the trend, and it really went pretty quickly up towards the 4 mark, then came back, and it was kind of consolidating for quite some time. So I started to nibble, and the trade was not a huge trade. I mean, fortunately, I got some early on and whatnot, and then I added into the 370, 380 range, but I was hopeful that it was going to break through that 4 and really squeeze out before the day's end, but it just kind of peaked at that 4 level. So it reminded me a lot of WKHS in the sense, not necessarily for a squeeze from here to double or anything like that, but in the sense that it was at 370s for quite a bit of time, and it was working through some size at this level, and then it ended up squeezing through that point. And WKHS did a very similar thing where pretty much was sideways most of the day, and then towards 2-3 p.m. plus it took off. And the reason why that interests me is just because this is a very thick float as well. So a lot of times, sometimes people will scale, make decisions based on this is a really thick name, there's a big float, so I can short it with X size, and then when it trades relatively thin, you start to get some really nice moves like we did on WKHS. So ideally, we get a week open and maybe a second leg to it. That's what I'd be looking for, and we'll see what happens with that. If it opens up and it fails, then I'll look for the fade, of course. But some great volume today. Ideally, 370, 380 starts to kind of base Tuesday morning, tomorrow morning, and then it starts to ramp towards 420s, 450s, something like that. IMUX. I always told myself that I did not want to forget this one. This used to be VTL, if you guys remember. It had a huge move. It was around the 20 cent range to the 70 cent range, I think. And was about 1 million float after the reverse split, and it just kind of faded off. And I told myself I got to make a mental note, like when I see it on scan, that I need to react rather quickly. So obviously we would probably need some shorts in this to have any secondary type of move, but I did trade it a little bit on Friday into the close with some 1060s, 1030s, 1060s. For me, I'd need to see it prove itself. I would expect it just to have a little bit of a weak open and maybe do nothing, but it did have a nice push into the close on Friday, so I am definitely interested in it if it has any news. They just had a couple conferences, things like that. Nothing crazy, but you never know. And it only takes one low floater to get the market back and excited and whatnot. So ideally, we have a trade here. And at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't. So I'm looking for probably 1080s 11 to base, and then look for a trend from there. I would assume that it's going to fail off the open, and just that's that. But I'm going to keep it on radar, and 1080s 11 start to base. I'm very, very interested. Talk about some other not necessarily illiquid, but let's talk about some more liquid type names. Roku's been an incredible name as of late. I got a nice fade off. I was short on Friday and pretty much shorted right up here and covered into the pullback, and then I covered the rest right over here. I wasn't gonna overstay on it at all. That's if you're trading this thing, you need to take advantage of the big moves and then move on if it starts to show any consolidation or any base. So that's what I did. Higher the better. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking $100, $100, and great, higher the better. And any big gap up that has a parabolic, I'm interested in it. But for now, it's had such relative strength compared to the market recently that this thing could actually hold on for quite a bit of time. So I am definitely watching, and I would be looking for this type of action where it peaks out a few times, and I have no problem fading it. And any flush, I'm going to be covering at least a third, if not half. And then if it starts to base and start to go back up towards where my entry was, I'm not going to fight that. I'm not interested in trying to find a top or bet that it's going to be the top. I'm just interested in looking for a good reward to risk type ratio and go ahead and fade it, or even trade it long. That's fine. But this is the type of action I'm looking for. And like I said, if it starts to consolidate, head higher, I'm not looking to overstay. PINS, I got long on this on Friday. This was a nice one. The way that I'm trading these recently, these IPOs, you got to expect the unexpected. You got to expect them to go both directions further than you think. Just like JMIA, and when it flushed out, we can look at the daily here. When it flushed out, and as well as when it came back up. So that's what I'm thinking right now with PINS, and it had the earnings, and then it gapped down, ended up kind of ramping up to the 28s, a little bit higher, then came all the way back, gapped up the next day, faded. So this has been a pretty steady unwind. No reason for shorts to cover since the earnings. Now, I had a nice steady bid all day, and what I'm looking for tomorrow is for it to maybe come back and basically retest. And as long as it holds the 25-30 level, I'm still interested. If it starts to get heavy at the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and it doesn't really do much, then probably not interested. But if it comes in and it has a weak open and it's just not a lot of volume, 25-30s, bases kind of perks up, bases 40s perks up, bases 50s, then I'll start to risk based off 24-30s again and look for the breakout. That's what I did on Friday. I was buying into the flushes, and I kind of saw a relative strength compared to the market and compared to the way that it was trading prior, and I just felt like I said with JMIA, I think that you just got to expect that it's going to be stronger both directions. Doesn't necessarily mean that long term this thing's going to break out and this is the bottom. All I'm thinking is that it's going to maybe last a couple more days than most people think on the bounce, and then maybe come right back in. So I'm going to be prepared for both directions, but I like the fact that it has $2 a range. It's a great price range. I like the maybe $16 to $25 range, $15 to $25 range. That kind of level is fantastic for me. And that's another reason why HIVB. This was a nice one on Friday. I got long, pretty much dips in the morning, but this is what I sort of call a transitional day, where you've got that big gap up. And when I say transitional day, kind of compare it to SE, where it's got that big gap up day. It comes back and it kind of consolidates all day. Same thing with LB. You've got that big range day, but the real move is going to happen the next couple days. So a lot of times you get all positions ready to go on this day, but it just wants to either pull back or rally back just a little bit longer than you think. And the easier trade, in my opinion anyway, comes the days after. Meaning, you might get long, really long, thinking that this thing's going to break out and it looks fantastic, and then it just comes all the way back in towards the close. Then that next day is the nice clean dollar breakout, for example, on LB that we had. The idea was basically joining the trend versus VWAP on Friday, and it was a nice clean dollar per share. So we'll see what happens, but that's what I'm going to be looking for on HIB. Again, I look at Friday as that sort of transitional day, so it could go either way, but what I do know, which is kind of a 50-50 guess as to which way it's going to go, but what I do know is that 24 is going to play a big role. So if it starts to perk and hold on 24s and starts to go 24.20, 24.30, I'm going to look to join dips with a risk off of 24. If it starts to peak at 24, I'm going to look for 23.80s to start to get heavy. I'm going to look to join the trend versus 24. So I just know that 24 will become a big level for me to use for my risk. ERWR was added to the S&P 600. You can see the big volume this day right here. That's what this print was right here. And then a beautiful day on Friday, just kind of kept on going. So the higher the better on this one. I don't mind joining it. I'm not too confident in joining the long side. But I'm just going to sit here and hope for higher and higher and higher, so that when and if we do get that backside setup, I can go ahead and join the trend. So right now in this type of market, for me, I'm looking for high daily ranges breaking out of their normal range. So we talked about that on a couple of the last YouTube videos. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to go back to our YouTube channel, and I talk about sort of how I anticipate the names that are going to have the range, because I don't want to get stuck in something that's going to break out and then pull right back. I want something that I can join a trend that when it's breaking either above or under the current consolidation levels. FL was a nice one, but it turned into a very much a sleeper, watching paint dry all day. So at least I identified that that was the situation, so I went ahead and moved on. I joined the fade out of the open, and it was okay for a little bit. I got a couple good ads and covered the washes, and then I got another couple ads, but then you just sit there and it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 50 minutes, and it's just within a super tight range, and these little pushes, they're going to fail, but you still got to keep your risk in check, but then it comes right back, and it's just a pain. So I identified that this was, one of those sideways price action ones. I just moved on, and that was the right thing to do, because it pretty much held that level the rest of the day. However, I do think that we're going to have either, if we get a weak open, it gets bought, I'll join that trend. If we open up and it remains relatively weak, then I have no problem joining. But we had 25, almost 30 million shares traded on Friday, so I think that we're going to have a pretty decent secondary move. But I need to get it away from this level. Otherwise, we're just going to be in a sideways consolidation pattern for some time. So again, for me, my style, especially in this market, is to have a couple stocks on watch, put feelers on, and then scale into the trade that works. DVAX was a trade on Friday that I joined. Right over here short. The prior close I think was 635, so I got short anticipating red, kind of added along the way. Covered up a bit too soon each time, but stayed with it for the most part. And it ended up being a pretty decent trade. They got a bidder there into the close, brought it back to VWAP, as you can see. Sometimes that happens. You'll notice it, like when stocks really unwind, you'll notice that they pretty much have a buyer that'll take it right up to VWAP when they do rebound, and that ends up being the resistance a lot of times. But I'd watch for a morning move, ideally towards 6, and then I'd be looking to fade it again. There was definitely a seller in there, but this is going to be a nice opportunity. I like the price range as well, because especially on Friday, that was $1 per share of an unwind. And you really didn't need much buying power to take that trade. EOLS, you can see VWAP seller. So typically what I look for is this type of action. You saw it on CC. You can see it again right here. CC has been straight down since 40s, and the idea has been the only way that I would bounce it is the days that it holds over VWAP. And when VWAP starts to peak and be the peak, it's just a continual seller throughout the day. So that's the sort of thing that I look for to kind of gauge which way I want to go. Same thing with EOLS here. It's pretty much showing you that there's a seller present. So as long as these levels remain as the peak, I'd love to continue to fade it as long as we're under VWAP. And maybe anticipate a move towards 15 or 14, something like that. LK was a nice pullback off the open, but it's pretty much sideways price action right now. Higher the better in a situation like this, and then I'm going to be looking for a pullback of some sort. I kind of reminds me of Tiger, where everybody's trying to find the bottom and play the dip, and it's just they're just selling. So keep in mind, there's so many IPOs right now that are going, but don't forget that some of these thin ones, if you guys remember they had these huge moves, and then they just went to nothing. And even QTT, I think, had the similar, where it had that huge move, ended up obviously coming back. That was a fun trade and whatnot. But just remember that, these IPOs, these recent IPOs, not all of them are going to continue to be fantastic big movers like we've seen. A lot of these are just going to go down to $5 and really pull back. And if you guys remember, like Blue Apron, this was a really big one that had a huge move. It went to 11s and now it's under $1. So just keep in mind, that's why I'm kind of following these ones, just because the ones that are weak, they've been unbelievable. You get on the right side, you get an instant 50 cents, you get another 50 cents. It's some pretty good range on a low price stock. So that's definitely of interest. LB, higher the better. This had a nice breakout off the transitional day that I call it. And at this point, I'd just be looking to join a trend. So if it has a weak open, it looks like it's going to go red to green, I join that. If it gaps up and it looks like it's going to pull back, then I join that. But I think we have about two more good days of potential opportunity in this, and then it's probably going to come off my radar. We've got ASCMA. They filed restructuring, Chapter 11, etc. last week. A lot of volume on that day, and it kind of ramped up. Unfortunately, a newsletter came in and kind of screwed up the trade. But the next couple days will be the buy-in days if people got heavily short. So the way that it reacted, I was pretty impressed. And so we'll see what happens. But if it starts to break out over 130, I'm definitely interested in taking this long, and I'm definitely interested in over 150 for a potential squeeze. I could see this having some type of big, and for whatever reason this daily chart does not work for me. But if it does bust through that 130 and 150, I could see it having a pretty decent move. It did have a nice big move this day. It kind of shows you what it can do. But unfortunately, a newsletter came in like right up here and bought it and sold it. And then they did it again and it failed. So you can see that there's been a buyer kind of steadily coming in. It's been relatively easy to borrow. And, you know, a lot of people do short stuff thinking, you know, that it's going to go to zero when Chapter 11 happens and whatnot. So I definitely like the fact that there was 10 million shares traded that day, and I definitely like the fact that it's holding. It's a potential, and again, triggers 130, 150 range. And last but not least, AVTR. It's been pretty easy to borrow. Again, just like I've been saying, focusing in on you know, these IPOs, this type of stock, you can kind of see the wicks that we talk about. You know, where it pulls back and then they get bought back up, pulls back, gets bought back up. That signifies that there's a buyer there, usually a buyer present, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to go higher. It could just be they're trying to save face by the end of the day. However, right now I'm going to assume that dips versus 17 should work, and higher the better. This is the type that had some really good volume, and it could easily go 18, 19, maybe even higher. And it also could go right back down, obviously. But I like this price range, and I'm going to be looking to join whatever trend that it does have. And I'm not afraid to short it even after it goes red and red and red and red, because the same stuff that we talked about earlier. So again, you know, a lot of people will probably say, oh my gosh, there's so many stocks to watch. But just remember, you know, Maxar, MAXR last week, I was very familiar with this daily chart. I was very familiar with what was going on. I was very familiar with this move. I knew exactly where it was. When the news came out, I was able to react that much faster just because I knew exactly where we were in relation to the daily chart. I didn't even need to look at the daily chart. I already knew what it looked like. And so that's why I was able to get long so early. And I posted the chart on Twitter and Instagram if you guys didn't see it. But I pretty much just added because I knew that it was recently pulling back off the, I think it was earnings or whatever it was, but it had a huge breakout, and it squeezed and it pulled back, and it was just a nice steady unwind, and there was really no reason to cover. And when that happens, if it rips and you've got a nice, basically risk to $7, $7.20, $7.30 to me is a no-brainer. So I was able to react that much faster just because I'm so familiar with the daily chart, because I do scans like this. I'm looking at everything. I'm memorizing without really trying. You know, I'm going through, okay, this looks good. I like this IMUX. I'm going to be watching it next week. You know what? The trade may not be Tuesday or Wednesday, but if it has news on Thursday or Friday or whatever it may be, and I see it hit scan, I can react that much faster. And same thing, Roku. You know, the trade may not be tomorrow, it may not be the next day, but I know that when I see it gapping up on a particular day, I'm already there. I already know that that's my main watch, because there's going to be a profit taking at some point, whatever, or nearing a squeeze, same thing. So again, I would encourage you to just kind of think about that when you know you're seeing these lengthy scans. In the morning, I always go down to about 2 or 3 main watches, and then I have some secondary watches. So it's not like I'm looking to trade 20 stocks at once. All I'm doing is getting familiar with everything that does have some, it does perk my interest a little bit. And then that way, when and if anything does happen, I can just snap my fingers and I'm in, because I already know where it's at. While other people are, oh, let me look at the daily chart. Let me see what it's been doing. Oh, you know, this, that, whatever, had this resistance here. Okay, now I can, oh, crap, the trade's gone. So that's the whole point with these. So anyway, any questions, reach out, comment section below. More than happy to help out anybody with questions. Have a great night, and we'll see you in the room tomorrow.